Does the Coconino Sandstone disprove the flood of Noah's day? Hi, it's Calvin Smith here, and welcome to Creation Basics, where our goal is to make God's creation part of your everyday conversation. Today's question is this: does the Coconino Sandstone disprove the flood of Noah's day? You see, to refute the Bible's historical account of Noah's flood, secular geologists often claim this: because one of the Grand Canyon's major layers was deposited in a desert over millions of years, it obviously had to have formed by wind and couldn't have formed underwater. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the argument, this layer called the Coconino Sandstone, it's full of fossilized sand dunes, as thick as 300 meters in some places. But the problem with these evolutionary claims is that many of the scientists cited as experts making this claim, they never personally examined the Coconino Sandstone to determine if their claims were actually true. And their argument was based on theoretical knowledge, not actual field research. Now, the debate is this: were these fossilized sand dunes formed by wind or underwater? Now, features of the original dunes and the wear and tear of the sand grains would of course be very different under the two types of conditions. So several years ago, a team of creation geologists actually traveled to the Coconino Sandstone to conduct some field research. And on a side note, I know one of them personally. He's a friend of mine who's a geochemist who lives in Alberta. Anyway, they examined the characteristics of the Coconino and compared them with modern sand dunes in both deserts and underwater. And through their observations, they discovered that many of the widely accepted claims about the Coconino are absolutely false. The Coconino Sandstone doesn't have the same characteristics as modern desert sand dunes, as assumed by secular geologists, but rather, observational evidence suggests the Coconino was formed underwater. And this, of course, supports biblical history, particularly Genesis 6-9, the account of the Great Flood. Now, modern wind-blown sand dunes form when wind carries and deposits these sands into piles. And as the piles grow, the grains are sorted by size, and the piles of sand eventually collapse on themselves and forming deposits at steep angles, usually around 32 degrees. But modern sand dunes formed underwater are composed of deposited sand grains not sorted by size. And they also eventually collapse, but at a much gentler angle of around 20%. So when this team of geologists measured over 100 samples of the Coconino, they found that the grains were just moderately or poorly sorted. And they also measured 200 angles of collapse in the Coconino and found an average angle of 20%, with no evidence of extreme compaction. And this, of course, is comparable to measurements of other geologists. So direct observations indicate underwater formation for the Coconino. Also, when sand dunes form by wind, the sand grains become spherical due to multiple grain-to-grain collisions while they're being wind-blown in the desert. And over 100 different Coconino samples were collected over a broad area to varying depths. And they found that the grains were subangular to sub-rounded, but not well-rounded. So the assumption that the Coconino Sandstone was made of well-rounded sand grains was based on the assumption that it had formed by wind, not, again, by observational evidence. And also, this phenomenon mostly happens to larger grains because the smaller ones don't gain enough momentum. And the Coconino is made of mostly small sand grains. So more likely, erosion by water is to blame for damage to the sand grains. Also, it's been assumed by secular geologists that small four-legged creatures once walked on these dunes as their footprints in the Coconino. But the animals were almost always traveling up the sand dunes, and the tracks often began and then ended abruptly. And this is consistent with the behavior of climbing to escape the rising floodwaters. So these widely accepted false claims about the Coconino Sandstone present an important warning. How could so many leading geologists have been wrong about the Coconino? Well, maybe because the textbooks and other references say that the Coconino was formed by wind-blown sand, or because they relied on statements of others without examining the Coconino themselves, or because geologists tend to rely on widely accepted claims of other geologists unless given a reason to re-examine them. But they were all starting with the wrong assumptions, millions of years to form the Coconino Sandstone, for instance. So this team of creation geologists knew the Coconino Sandstone couldn't have formed by wind-blown sand because it contradicts biblical history. So they performed actual field research, which has revealed problems with widely accepted claims about the Coconino. So, does the Coconino Sandstone disprove the global flood of Noah's day? No. Actually, according to the actual field research, it not only fails to discredit Scripture, but it greatly confirms biblical history. If you're appreciating this content, visit the answersingenesis.ca website for much more. Please consider donating to the ministry, and whatever platform you're accessing this on, it likely has some combination of features that allow you to subscribe or like or share, and we'd appreciate you taking the time to do so, because it's probably the best thing you can do to help us continue to do outreach. Until next time, I'm Cal Smith. Blessings to you.